The sun had barely pierced the horizon when I woke to the familiar ache in my chest, the one that had become my morning companion over the past few years. Our little house in Oregon was quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as the wind pressed against the siding. I could hear Lily's slow breathing from her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of dreams I hoped were sweet. Ethan, my teenage son, was still in bed, though I knew he would be gone by the time I returned from the grocery store, probably out with friends I didn't trust entirely. I moved carefully, as if the floorboards themselves were listening. Coffee first. I needed warmth, caffeine, and a moment to collect myself before the day's avalanche of responsibilities swept me away. I filled the kettle and leaned against the counter, staring at the stack of unopened mail, mostly bills. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, an invisible weight pressing on my shoulders. I had avoided opening them yesterday and the day before that, pretending that ignorance might somehow make the problems disappear. David's absence from the kitchen was conspicuous, though not unusual. He had probably gone into town for work, a phrase that had lost its meaning long ago. I could almost feel his presence hovering like smoke around the edges of my life. A promise of security that never quite materialized, a quiet threat of chaos lurking just out of sight. The smell of brewed coffee did little to chase away the tension in my shoulders. I sipped slowly, feeling its warmth settle in my stomach, but not in my heart. This house, this town, this life, they were supposed to be safe, predictable. Yet every morning felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon whose depths I dared not measure. The first crack appeared in the mail. A letter from the credit union, marked urgent. I tore it open with hands that trembled slightly, expecting some new catastrophe, but not prepared for the totality of the one waiting inside. David had gambled again. The savings account meant for Lily's treatment, a few months' worth of her medication and therapy, was nearly empty. I sank to the floor, the envelope trembling in my lap. The numbers blurred as tears filled my eyes, each one a silent scream. I should have seen it coming. I had seen it before, countless times. Yet hope, that stubborn, irrational hope, had tricked me into believing things could change, that David could change. But change is not something you demand from someone who doesn't want it, and I had been demanding it for years. Ethan barged into the kitchen just then, tossing his backpack onto the counter, a scowl cutting across his freckled face. He had been in a fight at school, the principal's note in his pocket a testament to bruised knuckles and worse, bruised reputations. He avoided my eyes, like he always did when guilt pressed against him, like shadows pressing against a sunlit wall. "Mom," he mumbled, almost a whisper, almost afraid, almost ashamed. I didn't mean to. But there was no time for explanations. There never was. I pulled him close anyway, my arms a shield he probably didn't deserve, holding on to him as if the act itself could stave off the chaos outside our walls. I wanted to scream at David, at Ethan, at the world, but I didn't. Instead, I cleaned the scraped knee on Ethan's forearm and forced a smile for Lily, who had stirred awake and was crying softly from her crib. Lily's fragile body felt impossibly small in my arms as I carried her to the car for her appointment. The winter light was pale and colorless, the clouds hanging heavy as if they, too, mourned our lives. The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and fear, an aroma I had grown all too familiar with. "You're doing everything you can," the nurse said gently, and I nodded, though the words felt hollow. Everything I did seemed to slip through my fingers like sand or smoke, impossible to grasp or hold. David called just as we were leaving. He asked if I'd checked the mail, if everything was under control. The word control felt ironic, almost cruel. There was nothing under control. Not the bills. Not the kids. Not him.
Not me.
I hung up, forcing a smile for Ethan, who had insisted on coming along.
Despite my protests,
he was quiet, glancing out the window at the bare trees lining the highway. I wanted to tell him that the world could be cruel, that people could fail, that love could hurt. But I couldn't. Not yet. In the quiet of the car, I allowed myself a moment of grief, letting the tears fall freely for Lily, for Ethan, for David, for the life I had once imagined. I did not cry for myself, not yet. There was too much to do, too much to protect, too much that demanded my presence. By the time we returned home, the house felt colder, emptier, the walls echoing with unsaid words and unmade choices. I washed the dishes, fed Lily, and listened to Ethan's headphones blaring music that felt louder than it needed to be. And all the while, I kept a diary hidden in my nightstand, a secret witness to the slow erosion of our family. Because some battles must be fought alone, and some truths are too heavy to share, even with those we love. The air in the house felt heavier than usual that evening. David returned late, claiming a long day at work, his coat smelling faintly of smoke and something else, something metallic that made my stomach twist. I had learned long ago that questions invited lies, so I chose silence, standing in the kitchen with Lily cradled in my arms while Ethan paced the living room, headphones dangling from one ear. But silence can be deafening. I confronted him anyway, unable to swallow the bitter truth any longer. David, the savings account. Lily's medicine, what happened? My voice was steadier than I felt, but the tremor at the edges betrayed me. He laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. It's not what you think, Claire. I cut him off. You gambled it. Again. You lied to me. You lied to the kids. How many times do we have to go through this? He ran a hand through his hair, looking at me like I had suddenly become a stranger, a judge, an enemy. I'm trying, okay? I'm trying to fix things. You're not trying, I said, my voice breaking. You're destroying everything. You don't get to try when everything is falling apart because of you. Ethan watched from the doorway, guilt written in the lines of his face. He didn't speak because he couldn't, because he, too, had secrets, because sometimes silence is all we have left. That night, as I lay beside Lily in her crib, I felt the weight of every broken promise pressing down on me. The home that had once felt safe now seemed like a fragile shell, trembling in the wind. Sometimes when I am alone, memories creep in like shadows across the floor. I see my mother, frail and pale, coughing into the sheets while my father argued in another room. I remember the silence, the fear, and the helplessness. That helplessness, the inability to save someone I loved, haunted me as I watched David spiral, as I listened to Ethan make choices that scared me to my core. I remember thinking, as a child, that if I could just be strong enough, if I could just hold on, maybe the world wouldn't hurt so badly. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that strength is never enough, and sometimes love itself isn't enough to stop the tide from rising. I see myself in Ethan sometimes, stubborn and reckless, wanting to escape, wanting to be more than the life we are given. And I fear Lily will grow up with the same haunted eyes, wondering why the people who love her most are always fighting battles she cannot see. Lily's condition worsened unexpectedly one evening. Her breathing grew shallow, her small body trembling with fever. I called the emergency line with trembling fingers, my voice taut with panic. David was gone, no explanation given, no apology offered. At the hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant and fear engulfed me. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, speaking in clipped tones, their urgency a mirror to the pounding in my chest. I clutched Lily's hand, her skin hot against mine, praying for something, anything, to ease her pain. Ethan sat silently beside me, guilt and fear etched into his young face. He had stayed this time, finally recognizing that some consequences were bigger than him. I did not scold him. I did not scold anyone. There was no room for anger, not when every heartbeat mattered. Later, in the dim hospital corridor, I allowed myself to collapse. My body shook, my tears fell freely, and for a moment, I let the grief wash over me. David's absence, Ethan's missteps, Lily's illness, they were all threads of the same tapestry, tangled beyond repair. And yet somehow I still held on. Somehow, I still had to hold on. Because I was their mother. And mothers do not give up. Not entirely.
Not. Ever.
It was a Wednesday morning when the first letter arrived, thick and formal, stamped with words that made my stomach sink before I even opened it. David's debts, long buried under vague reassurances and empty promises, were now official. Creditors demanded repayment, deadlines looming like storm clouds. The numbers were staggering, impossible for a single family to absorb, yet we were expected to pay. Ethan stood behind me, peering over my shoulder with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Mom, I can fix it," he whispered. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the reality pressed in too hard. The letter had been sent to the wrong address, mine, not David's, and I realized the precariousness of our situation. The fragile illusion of safety had shattered entirely. And then came the news from school. Ethan had been caught in possession of stolen property, evidence pointing to a local gang. The principal's call left me trembling. I could barely form words over the phone, trying to calm myself while fearing the worst. The boy I had watched grow, the boy I had tried to protect from the world, was now entangled in it in ways I could not control. I sank into the living room chair, Lily resting against me, her small body heavier than her actual weight, her fevered skin pressing against my chest. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I realized that silence could hold both solace and dread. David returned home late that evening. He avoided my gaze, his expression carefully blank. I could feel the tension coiling. Around us, a silent accusation neither of us wanted to voice. "Claire," he said finally, his voice low. "We can work this out. But some things cannot be worked out. Some things break the foundation. So completely that repair is impossible without demolition." The days blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and hurried decisions. I found myself forced into choices I had never imagined. Should I call the police about Ethan's theft? Should I shield him, protect him, risk his future for a chance at keeping him whole? And David, could I forgive him, even partially, for betraying every promise he had ever made? The weight of responsibility pressed on me like a physical force. Every action had consequences, every decision a ripple that threatened to drown us all. I became a strategist, calculating risks and outcomes while suppressing the fear that gnawed at my insides. Ethan, quiet but watchful, sensed the tension and withdrew further. His rebellion was not anger, but survival, a shield against a world he didn't understand, and a mother he feared might break under the strain. I realized then that love alone was insufficient. Protection alone was insufficient. I had to act, decisively, even when my hands shook and my heart ached. And somewhere deep within me, I found a flicker of clarity. In order to save them, I might have to let some part of them go. Lily's illness reached a new critical point. Her breathing grew shallow, and her small body trembled violently during the night. I held her close, whispering reassurances I was not sure I believed. Ethan, for once, stayed by my side. He did not speak, did not fidget with his phone or music. He simply sat, silently witnessing, perhaps understanding, the depth of what it meant to be responsible for another life. David was absent again, his reasons increasingly implausible. For the first time, I felt the full weight of our isolation. The world was not cruel, it was indifferent, and only our love could hold it at bay, even momentarily. We waited in the dim light of Lily's bedroom for hours, breathing in synchrony, sharing the fear that had no name. That night, I realized something profound. Sometimes, being together meant facing the storm without shields, without excuses, without the comfort of someone else taking responsibility. By morning, Lily's fever had broken slightly. Ethan offered a small, tentative smile, and I allowed myself the briefest flicker of hope. The crisis had not ended. The debts, the secrets, they were still there. But for a few hours, we were alone together, and that, at least, mattered. The day David returned, I was waiting with a quiet resolve I hadn't felt in years. The sun was low, spilling pale light through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I had married, the man I had loved before the lies, before the debts, before the constant fear. "I can't keep doing this, Claire," he said softly, almost pleading. "I know," I replied, "and neither can I." The reckoning was not dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no ultimatums. Just the weight of truth pressing us both into acknowledgement. We had failed, and now we had a choice. We could crumble under the pressure or attempt to rebuild, piece by piece, knowing the structure might never be perfect, but it could still exist. We discussed therapy, intervention, financial planning. We debated how to handle Ethan's legal troubles. And for the first time in months, I felt a sliver of control, fragile but real. Healing came slowly, painfully. Lily's health stabilized, though each day required vigilance and care. Ethan, remorseful and cautious, began to make small amends. He apologized for the lies, the fights, the thefts, and started attending counseling sessions with me. I forgave him, not fully, not yet, but enough to allow connection to grow. David, too, took small steps toward accountability. He joined a support group, spoke honestly about his addiction, and for the first time, I saw him accept responsibility. Without excuses. Our home, once fractured and cold, began to regain warmth, not because everything was perfect, but because we were finally willing to be honest with ourselves and each other. I reflected often on the fragility of family, the invisible threads that hold people together. Sometimes love is not grand gestures or sweeping promises. Sometimes love is showing up in the quiet moments, in the daily acts of endurance, in the willingness to face the darkness without turning away. One evening, we stood together on the small deck behind our house, watching the Oregon sky turn molten gold and rose. Lily leaned against my side, Ethan standing close, and David beside him. The air was crisp, the wind carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the warmth of my family around me. The debts, the mistakes, the lies. They were not gone, but their weight seemed less unbearable. We had survived, not unscathed, but together. I whispered a silent promise to myself, to them, and perhaps to some higher power I no longer named aloud. We would endure. We would continue, day by day, moment by moment. Because beneath the Oregon sky, even in the shadows, there is light. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we could find it.